Hey, in this tutorial we're going to look at how to make tree rings like this in Figma using generator. So let me re-enable the UI and delete everything. So just like in the previous video, the main workhorse of this whole process is again going to be the noise node. But unlike the last time, we're going to apply it not to a line but to a circle. So I have it in my templates, but for the sake of this tutorial we're going to do it from scratch. So we create a point. Here it is. We move the point. Now the move node has two modes, position and vector. We need to choose vector because that instead of X and Y gives you distance and angle. I want to show the center so that I see what I'm doing, and then I want to change the distance, and actually also I want to disable move space because then it lets me move the point and see where the center is. So I want to move it a little bit further, and now if I rotate the angle, it rotates around that center. So I'm going to repeat this, and I will use a range to control the angle from 0 to 360. When I loop it to the repeat, I see that there are 4 points, even though the count says 5, and you see that there are 5 point objects, also 5 center objects. We need to disable show center to not have these objects here because that makes things slower. And then we have 5 objects, the count is 5, but we see 4 points. That's because the first and the last point are in the same place. The way to change that is over here, the from parameter, we set it to start, and then it starts in the beginning and then it goes all the way to the end minus the last segment. And this way you can easily control how many points you have and the point distribution. So I'm going to increase this to something like 100. So that's 100 objects that I need to show because points are not first-class citizens and I need to simulate them with circles. So 100 points is actually 100 circles that I need to send over. So the thing to do here is to, as quickly as possible, create a path, plug the points into the path, and then just double-click the path so that that's all you see. And this way it doesn't matter that it's 100 points, it's pretty fast because then only one object is sent over. Now I'm going to add a stroke, a color stroke, temporarily, just so that we can see the curves, and I'm going to set it to black. Okay, now this is not closed, and I'm going to set it to linear because I want to show you something. So in the previous tutorial what we did is we took the noise node and then we applied it to a linear distribution of things. Here we need to do the same thing but with a circular distribution of things, and there's a problem with that. So let's take the noise node. Let's just plug it into here, into the distance. And let's say that it's from 100 to 150, something like that. All right. So right now it looks okay, but let's say we were to increase the scale of this noise. And so now, depending on the seed and how everything is distributed, the ends here might not line up exactly, especially when the noise is scaled and it becomes very visible. So the way to fix that is to prepare the numbers beforehand. So here's what we do. We disconnect this noise. We will say that there's going to be a base radius, and I'll set that with a number. I'll say 100 in this case. And then this is going to go from 0 to 50. And if I add them together, like this, I now have the same value, but separated into the base value and the additional noise. Now I don't plug this directly into anything. What I do now is I say repeat. And then I loop this noise to the repeat, just to make sure that it's a clean list. Let me move this off to the side over here. And then I plug this into an iterate because I need to go through the resulting list. And then I plug this into the distance. So right now it's very cyclical. The reason for that is that right now I'm repeating 100 points, but I'm only feeding it 5 values. As I increase the number of values, the cycles become bigger, but actually all I need to do, in fact, is to have an outside value, like 100 points. Then I plug that into this count, and I also plug this into the repeat count. So now it's the same amount of points. Another thing I'd like to do is I want to cache this list. The reason I need to cache it is so that I can control when it gets regenerated. So the first thing to do right now is to fix this broken loop. The way I'm going to do that is after the cache, once I know that the list is solid and it's not going to change, I'm going to add a new node that I added just a few updates ago from the list menu right here in the functions called blend edges. And what blend edges does is it takes the list or the array, whatever, and it creates a smooth transition between the values in the beginning and the end, trying to preserve their texture. So as you can see right now, there's a break, but as I increase the amount of points, the break becomes less and less obvious, and in any case, the tangents of the curve are now smoothly blended. So let's say I leave the amount at 6, and now if I say closed, so now I have a fully closed curve with noise, which I can control and which is predictable. To make it a bit more interesting, I'm going to add detail to the noise. Something like that. Actually, let me hide the UI so I can see this better. And yeah, I think this amount of detail is fine. Maybe the scale needs to be bigger at something like 20. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So now I need to reduce the radius of these rings and also evolve them and mutate them. So let's start with the radius. First of all, everything that is looped to this needs to be looped explicitly. To this repeat, I mean. Just so that there's no confusion. So now I'm going to take this noise and this range. I'm going to control combine them. And I will plug this combine into the loop parameter of the repeat. So they're both looped. There we go. Nothing changes right now, but I just want to have this explicitly defined. And then I'm going to repeat this. So for now it's 5 times. I need to use a range to change its radius. So let's say it starts from 100 and ends with, let's say 0. We'll fix it later. I plug this here instead of the number. And then we plug this, or we loop it into the outer repeat, like so. And so this should give us 5 rings that are getting smaller every time. It did not, because this cache also needs to be looped to the outer loop. So we control combine the cache and the range. And then we plug this into here instead. And so the reason this works and the reason you need to do this with the cache is because when we generate this list of points and then we cache it, the cache from now on stops any new requests from coming in. And the only way you can like ping the cache and force it to get its inputs to regenerate their values is to connect it to a loop parameter of a repeat node. And then the repeat node, when it finishes its loop, it'll then ping the cache to sort of open the doors and let the new batch of values in. So this is the result of what we got. We're going to want more of them. Actually, for now, let me have fewer points and we'll bring it back to more points later, but this will just make the generation faster. All right. And instead, I will say that I want 50 rings. Or actually, rather, you know what? I'm going to show this to you with 20 rings for now because we still haven't done the evolve parameter. We need to reduce the amplitude of the noise in the middle because it looks more pronounced in the middle even though it's the same absolute value. So it needs to be relative. So over here where it says max, we need to actually use a range again. And the range will go from 50, which is where it starts, to, let's say, 0, because then the center of the tree will be more like a circle. So I'm going to plug this into the max. I'm going to plug this into the combine, which then lets me loop a bunch of stuff to the outer repeat, like so. And so we see that the amplitude of the noise gets smaller gradually as it gets closer to the middle of the tree. Another thing that's left is to use the evolve parameter. So we're going to use a range node. I'm going to say that I'm going to evolve it from 0 to 1, just to start with. Plug that into the evolve parameter, and then loop it with the outer repeat. Okay, so what's happening now is every ring, as it gets smaller, it also mutates a little bit, just like I showed in the previous tutorial. I think I want a bit more mutation, so I'm going to say 2. Okay, so this is getting interesting. Maybe I will even say 3. So as you can see, the rings are related to each other by shape, but then they change a little bit every time. That's what makes them look like tree rings. Okay, so I'm liking this geometry. I think this is what I'm going to keep for now. So now that I have this, instead of these strokes, let's give it some color. To start with, I think I'm going to generate, again, some values. In this case, I'm going to generate a range. So I want a range of... So, okay, let's do it this way. I'm going to have a color. This is going to be an HSV color, for example. I'm going to make it more saturated. I'm going to set it to be some kind of yellow, orange, whatever. That looks like wood. There you go. And then I am going to play with the value to start with. So I'm going to say that it goes from 50 to 100. Plug that into here. Actually, before I do that, I think what I want to do is I want to repeat this. I'm going to loop it directly. So now I have 5 values from 50 to 100. Then I'm going to iterate this. So I get them one by one. And now I'm going to plug this into the value, like so. So if I now plug this color into the style of each ring, I have the basics of my tree rings. I'm starting with dark and I'm getting lighter. And also they're repeating every 5 rings. So maybe I don't need every 5 rings. I want to try to be a bit simpler so that I can have more rings in the end. So I'm going to say 3. So then it'll have a dark ring and an intermediate ring and a light ring. Maybe 3 is, let's try 4. Because this is a bit too jarring, I think. All right, this is better. So now it's starting to look like tree rings. Let me increase the count. But by the way, this is 20 objects, but this whole thing is going to take a while if I increase it to something like 100 rings. So I'm going to fast forward this. But just know that when you're doing this for real, every time you're going to have to wait a little bit, because in certain cases you can't appreciate the effect unless you see the full extent of the effect. And I think this is one of those cases, because this looks like a certain type of ring configuration, but then when you have a lot of them, as you'll see in a little bit, it looks completely different. And to appreciate how the noise affects the shading and all of this, you really need to see them in their multitude. Okay, so at this point, this looks a lot more like tree rings, and this is now something that we can work with. What I would also like to do is I would like to vary gradually their saturation and their brightness overall. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring this back to 20, just so that I can work with it a bit more easily. I'm also thinking that this is way too yellow, so let me set it to like 31 or 32 or something to make it a bit more orange. Now I want to take this color, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to plug this into here to copy it, and then I will feed this into the style. So right now I'm doing nothing, What I actually want to do is I want to have a math node add a variable delta to the value. So I'm going to plug this in here, I'm going to plug this in here. So for now it's adding nothing, so it's still the same value. But if I now add a noise, and I say that I'm adding from -20 to 20, this is going to be way too bright, but we'll tone it down later. And then I plug this in. I think at first it's going to look completely wrong because the noise has a scale of 1, so it's just going to be jumping all over the place. Yeah, you see? But if I increase the scale of the noise to something like 10, now we're going to start to see something, but we're going to have to see it on a larger number of rings. Another thing I'm going to do is the same thing with saturation. So I will plug this in here. I will plug this in here. And I'm going to have a different noise, but also with the same scale. Run into the saturation, like so. And now I'm going to increase the number of rings to 100 again to see what result that gives. Okay, that's not exactly what I was thinking, but let's run through some seeds and see if we can randomize it into something decent looking. All right, maybe this is a little too saturated. So let me say that I want it to be around 68, something like that. And also I'm just going to randomize everything once again. And actually, since we're doing this anyway, we might as well go back to 100 points per ring to give it more detail and to make it look more interesting. Okay, you know what I don't like about this? Is that the saturation changes too fast. I need to increase the scale of the noise to, I'm going to say 40. I'm going to increase the detail of the noise to 3. I'm also going to say -15 because it gets really desaturated. Randomize everything. So I think this is a good enough place to stop. There's no tree bark. I mean, there's still a whole bunch of stuff that could be added, cracks, etc. But in this tutorial, I'm focusing only on the rings. I think this looks pretty decent, but as always, it's completely random. Everything about it can be changed. An example of this can be found in the help tutorials and examples in loops. It's called tree rings, so you can check that out, modify it, and play with it. As always, if you find Generator useful, if you like the work that I'm doing and you'd like to support me, the best way to do that is to buy a Generator subscription. It's less than $1 a day, and it'll help me keep making all the cool stuff that I'm making. Thanks for watching.